Hi everyone. In this video we're going to be building out a accounts receivable app in Bubble, a no-code accounts receivable app. But this is just going to be a prototype. We're not going to be focusing on the design elements of this. We're not going to be building out menus and floating sidebars and things like this. We're just going to be building out the business logic and the database and the workflows so that you can get an idea of how to build fairly complex things in Bubble without code. So let's get started with this. So one thing I want to mention is that I'll be building this out fairly raw. I won't be doing this like a proper training course. I'm going to be building it as I go. So just be aware of that. And what I'll try to do is to explain the concepts that I'm using as I come to use them. So I'm not going to go through a big long lesson of abstract concepts and then try and demonstrate them to you. I will build out the app, and as I need to explain those concepts to you, then I'll just stop and explain them in detail. But usually what you tend to do is if you need to use them and you understand why you need to use them, they tend to go in a little bit easier rather than just as abstract concepts. That's how I learn anyway, and I think that's the best way to do it. So let's get started. We'll create a new app. What's the name of this new app? We're going to call it NCC, which is no code coder accounts. And what type of app we're building doesn't really matter because it's just a prototype, but we'll just say it's a SaaS, details of what you're building, what's the goal, just playing around. For this example, it's going to be external, and let's create the new app. So Bubble will now go away and create our new app for us. Obviously you'll need your Bubble account setting up before you can do any of this. So it's going to try and take us through like an assistant, which we don't really need. So we're just going to start with a blank page and we're going to close the assistant. So we've got a complete blank canvas here to start with. So let's just look at what we're going to do in this app. Is we're going to enable you to build out a list of customers and to record transactions for those customers and to be able to see the accounts receivable, both the current balance and the aged balances. So it's not a full, I can't explain that, but maybe we'll build out a full one in a future video. But for this, just a prototype, just to get the core aspects down of what we need to do. So if you think about it, we then need a customer table, a customer type, and we need a transactions table or a transactions type to record those transactions. Fairly simple stuff. So the way that we get started with that is we go to data on our left hand side. And under data types, we've got one already in there, which is user. And this is one of the great things about Bubble, is that user authentication is already built in. We don't need to worry about it. It's already built in. Obviously we can build in privacy rules and we can do various things with that with permissions, but in terms of authentication we don't need to worry about that. We do need to build out the forms and things, but it's very, very straightforward to do. So we want to create a couple of things, a customer type, and we want to do a transaction type. Now when I'm building systems, I tend to put customers and suppliers and contacts similar to that in one table and then identify them as different types. And the reason being is that you think about it, we're building out an accounts receivable, which in the UK we generally call like a sales ledger. But if we just had it all in one, we could easily flip the switch to turn that into an accounts payable or a purchase ledger system. So that's what we're going to do. So rather than call it custom, I'm going to call it business entity. And I always use a singular. You can do it whichever way you like. I always like to use a singular in my name rather than entities, just entity. Make this data private by default. No, we're not going to do that. So we'll just click create. And then we can add new fields in there. So we just click create a new field. And obviously name is going to be one of them. And we select the type of the field. And it's just going to be a text. So we'll click create. And like I say, what we need to do is differentiate the types. Now in this prototype we're only building out customers, but let's set it up as though we're building out so that you can store all sorts of different types of business entities, if you like, customers, suppliers, prospects, whatever you want to do. So rather than have it as a text field, what we can do is to actually have it as a set of options that you can select from. And Bubble handily does this using option sets. Now in programming, these would be like enumerated types, which are, you know, hard-coded lists of things, and it just helps us to select them, helps us to present a list of users, options to the user, so they're just much handier than just storing it as raw text. So what we'll do is, and I like to precede my option sets with an underscore so that it differentiates them between tables and option sets. So I'm going to call this business entity type, and we'll click create. And yeah, it basically displays the name of whatever you're going to put in there into an attribute called display, and we can create new attributes on there if we want to. Okay, and we will do that, but for now, like I say, I'd rather explain things as I need to use it rather than explain it up front as an abstract concept. So we're going to say new option. One is a customer, one is a supplier or a vendor, and let's say one's called a prospect, for example. Okay, so we've got our options set there. So now we go back to our data types, and under business entity we'll create a new field, and this time we will say, we'll just call it a type. And what we can do there, scroll down, and we've got our business entity type there, so that means that what gets stored in there has to be from the option set. Okay, so let's just create another couple of things. Let's say an address, again that's just be a text, and an email. Fairly straightforward stuff. Again, a text. Okay, one other field that I want to store is the balance, because we want to store the balance of the customer that we can display quite easily to the user. So we'll create a new field and we'll say balance, and this one is going to be a number. Okay, so we've got that in there for our business entities. So we don't really need to do anything else at this point. Again, we'll come to things as we need to come to them. So as long as we know the design up front. So I'll tell you what we'll do, just so we know we're going to need a transaction type. Okay, and we'll create that. Notice how Bubble creates certain things for you, like the creator, modified, created date, the slug, which is something that you can use in the URI if you're creating a multi-page app. I only really use it Bubble for single page apps, but certainly you can use that if you want to. So let's go to our design tab now, and then we can start to put elements on the page. Now, one rule of thumb that I always use is to make sure everything goes in a group. So let's put this in a group, and we're just going to create a simple form now to create a new customer, so that we can get records into our new data type. So we'll put a text up here. Now, like I say, I'm not going to be going into really in depth about design with this. Really, we're just building our prototype. We'll make it look reasonable, but I mean, it's not designed to be used by the end user. So we'll just call this add new customer. Okay, and if we go down here, we'll see we've got like a style. Now, these are sort of standard styles that you can use, and you should use them, but not the Bubble standard. You should create your own sort of style guide for a proper app, and then use those styles that you create. You can do that through the style tab here on the left. But for this one, let's just remove the style, and then it'll give all the options to style this individually. And we will set this to say, let's say 24. Let's bold it. Yeah, and Barlow is sort of Bubble's standard font that they have. That's their branding, and they make it as the default for you. Definitely change that, otherwise it'll just look like a Bubble app and nothing else. So we're going to add a new customer, and then we need to add the fields on there. So like I say, all we're adding really is the name, the address, the email. So what we'll do, we'll come to our input forms here, and we'll put an input on the page. Okay, again, a little bit of styling is good. Again, to edit the style here on the individual control, we need to click the remove style link, and then we get these options here. Let's have a look. It's a bit too round for me, so I'm going to change that to 3. The one little gripe I do have with Bubble a little bit, and again, it's such a great tool that I shouldn't really complain. Why is it not letting me just type in 3? Right, 3, there we go. Okay, is that what the standard controls are not got standard styling on them, so they all look different when you initially drag them on there. Now, you're meant to do your own styling anyway, but still, it's a little bit of a gripe of mine, and I apologise. So horizontal padding, we don't want any of that, thank you very much, or maybe say 2, don't know, or maybe 4, I don't know. Horizontal padding just means the the gap between the edge and where the text is. Okay, we won't play around too much. You can go down the rabbit hole with this sort of stuff. So the placeholder, we will just say customer name, and the content format is going to be text. Limit the number of characters, no. I do like to tick that one, prevent the enter key from submitting. This input should not be empty, it shouldn't be. This should type in a name, and again this enables Bubble just to do a little bit of validation, front end validation for you on there. So we won't go into too much detail. I will just make this a little bit smaller, let's say 30, and try and keep everything consistent. Good stuff. So we'll put a text element on there. Okay, just make that a little bit bigger. Okay, and we'll just put a name, okay, on there. I'm not going to be big enough to show. Just let me, there we go. And what I can do there is just select them both, right click and select align vertical centers, just to line them up a little bit. There's lots of little tools like this, by the way, that you can use. Now, one of the things in Bubble that I've not done so far, but I'm going to do it now, is naming things is really important, because because we're in a no-code environment, it's a lot of point and click. It's a lot easier to have a clear reference to each element that you may need to reference as you're building your app. So I'm going to just name, what you do to name it, you just click on this up here, and group A, I will say is group add new customer. Cool. And we'll name the text box input customer name, that's fair enough. Text, we'll change that to text customer name. Okay, and we will just give this a name as well, add new customer title. Okay, and that's just important. Now, when you've got a couple of controls like this together, the name and the customer name, just let me shorten that a little bit and drag this over a little bit more. There we go. I've just ruined our centering there. Make sure we do it. So we're going to align vertical centers. When you get two controls that are sort of related like this, it's always best to group them. And the way to do that is just to select them together, right click and select group elements in a group. Okay. Now what I would do then is just extend that a little bit, both width and height, just so you can grab it, because otherwise you end up just grabbing the individual controls in there. And that way, once you've got that sort of handle, you can kind of just move it around as you like. Okay, so let's just put that back there. So name, okay, so now we need an address. So what I will do is I will add a text for the label. And this time, because it can be multi-line, the control I'll use is this one here, which is multi-line input. So let's pop that there. Okay. See how it styled it differently, which is quite annoying. So let's just put that right. Yeah. Okay. Roundness is 3. See, he's even used a different font on this one. So let's do our Barlow one. Let's have a look. Was it Barlow regular, was it? Was it Barlow 500 or something like that? And I think the font was actually 16 rather than 14, so 16. And the colour's completely different, isn't it? The background colour. So let's see, it's FC, FC, FC. So let's put that in there. Okay, so rounded is okay. So it kind of at least looks a little bit the same now. Okay, fair enough. We'll leave it at that. So with a text address. Okay, so text address, that's fair enough. Multi-line input A, nope. Address. Okay, and again, like I say, right click and group elements into a group. Okay, and like I say, just give yourself a little bit of left and right, so use it as a handle if you need to move the whole group around. Okay, what we will do with this one is I'll just move this up. It's a bit difficult to select that. Now notice what happens there is that if I move that out, when I'm dragging things, if I move, you can see the bubble gives you red outline to the actual group border. If you drag it somewhere and that disappears, that means you're dragging it outside the group and it won't be part of the group anymore. So just make sure that when you're moving things and dragging things, that the red line, the red box around the group is visible if you're dragging an element within the group itself. So one of the things that you can do as well is just you can hold down the control key and move left and right just to move it that little bit if you need to, or you can use these things here with the X, the positioning to the left, Y, the positioning from the top. I'll just move it a little bit one more, is that right? Yeah, okay. I mean, what I can do with this, by the way, is I can select both of those and I can select a line to the left, and then that will just move them there. So I could have done that as well. What I need to do really is to move this. I'll extend the group a little bit. Again, you see how you can go down the rabbit hole with all this stuff, which is why I don't really want to. I really want to get to the crux of the matter, which is how you build out the workflows and everything like this. That's a little bit big for an address, to be honest. Just bring that up. Cool. So the placeholder will be, just put address in there. Okay. So the next one is an email. So we'll just copy this here. And what you can do with Bubble, if you want to copy and paste something, what you can do is just hold down the control or the command key on your keyboard and then just drag it and it will copy, make a copy of whatever control is selected. So, oh, that's right. Okay, so let's change that to email. Oops. So let's change this to, the other thing as well, it will duplicate names on text labels, so that's why it's important you do name things, otherwise it can get a little bit tricky, shall we say. So input customer email, right, cool. Let's name the group as well, group customer email. Make sure I did that on the address. I did not, naughty boy, slap my wrist. Group address, or did we say what was it, customer? I think we did customer address, didn't we? Customer address, cool, right. So we've got our input fields there, right. I can get a little bit obsessive about this with the padding. Yeah, okay, what's the padding on that? Yeah, okay, fair enough. We'll leave it at that and get too deep into this. And again, this is just basic stuff. So name, address, email, that's fair enough what we've got. We know the type is going to be customer, so we don't need to worry about that. So we're just going to add a button now where you can save the new customer. So where are we? Okay, so up here in the visual elements, click the button. Okay, just make a nice decent sized button. Okay, let's call it save. And again, don't like the color, let's remove the color, let's remove the style, sorry, and let's keep it consistent at 16 like everything else. And there's a color, let's make it more greeny, that'll do. Okay, so we make sure what we're doing with these fonts here, are these the right font? That'll do, yeah, okay. We'll get to into it. So let's have a look. Okay, move that over a little bit. There we go. Sometimes you get these guides where you can see like the blue line lines up, so you know you're lining it up correctly. Okay, so save. So we're just going to save this now. Again, basic CRUD operation. Apart from with this one, all we're doing is creating. We're not doing anything else. So what we do with the button, select the button. Again, give it a name. It's already called it button save. That will do. I'll tell you what, just to make it a bit more descriptive, is button customer save. Okay, you've got to be as descriptive as possible, because especially in a single page app, you're going to have a lot of elements on the page. You've got to be pretty specific about how you name it. Okay, so to put a workflow and some business logic behind the save button, we go to edit, start to edit a workflow, or we can go over here and click workflow. Let's click that. Brings over to workflow tab. When button customer save is clicked, and then what we do then is we add actions onto this to tell it what to do. So it's fairly straightforward in this particular case, because all we're doing is saving a new customer, or what Bubble calls a thing. It tries to avoid technical terms in any respect, you know, like doesn't like to use record or object or whatever. It will just use thing. So we'll say click here to add an action. We go to data, in brackets things, and we say create a new thing. Okay, and the new thing we're going to create is a business entity, and then we're going to set the fields. So we will say, first one, let's say name equals, and then we're going to go down, and this is where your naming really comes in, because this is where it's going to be a lot easier for you to do. So input customer name, value, okay, the value that's held, that the user's typed in. Add another field, address, and again multi-line input address, okay, value again, and the last one is going to be email, and that's going to be input customer email, so value, okay, and that is just going to very simply create a new customer record for us in the business entity table or type. So what we want to do now is to make sure that when they click save, we save it, and then when it's saved, we then want to clear the inputs, so you've got a good sign that it's actually been removed, that it's been saved, and that we're ready to put a new one in if we want to. So to do that, we click here to add an action again, and this time we go to element actions, and there's an option here called reset inputs, and all we do is click that. Now the reason that's going to work, reset inputs, is that the save button is within a group, and anything that's in a group that's related to what we're saving then gets cleared with that reset inputs. Really simple, straightforward stuff. Okay, I think that we're done with that, to be honest. So all we've got to do is click the preview button in the top right, and okay, it's gone a little bit odd there. Just let me check that that's right. I think what the reason for that is that the group is not a fixed width, so make this element a fixed width, and I think that should be it. And just let's close that in a little bit there. So when you update in the background, you always get this link at the top. You just click it and it will refresh. There we go, a bit better. Right, so let's put a few things in there. Ignore. Just put my bloody address on there in front of a video. TR components. Okay, I make up an address. Tilbury Lane, Tilbury, Frommenshire. Again, just making stuff up. Oh, no, I didn't clear the placeholder for the email. It doesn't matter. FRM blah 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 blah. Okay, email is pete@trcomponents.com. Okay, and we will click save, and it clears the controls. So let's just go back and check with that saved. So go to data tab, and we go to app data, and all business entities. Very clever how it's worked out the plural there. Sorry, I shouldn't be impressed by that. Now we haven't saved the type, which is unfortunate. That's something that we should have done. But we can see it's saved it, okay, on there. So let's go and fix a couple of things that we got wrong. And the first one is this placeholder. So email. Okay. We don't even need placeholders. We got the controls there. But anyway. Now the other one is to save the type. So we go back to our workflow under when button customer save is clicked, create a new business entity, and this time we'll say set another field, and we'll say the type is equal to customer, and we can see that we've just got that hard-coded list because the type is that option set that we set up before. So we'll just say customer, and we'll also set the balance as a default value of 0, and all you've got to do there is just actually type that in and it will do it for you. Okay, so that should resolve that. Let's go back to our data and our app data. Now if you actually want to manually edit a record, you can just click this little pencil icon and let's have a look there. We will say the type is a customer and the balance is 0, and we'll save that. We'll hide that so we don't get that every time, and we will go back and we will do that, and we will say refresh the page so we get our changes, and we'll put a new customer in. Peacock fabrication, I don't know, I'm just making this up as I go along. Peacock house, Peacock road, Westingborough, WSB, and blah 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 blah. Okay, made up postcode, and we will now say this is Rachel at peacockfabs.com. Cool, let's save it. Let's go and check our database. We might need to click this refresh button at the bottom. Okay, balance is 0, set the type to customer. That's cool. Okay, good stuff. So let's go back to our design. And one of the things I've noticed here with the email is that where we've got content format, it still says text. So what we need to do with that is to just select email, and that way Bubble will do some validation for us just to make sure it's a valid email address on there. Again, I suppose it can be empty, it doesn't really matter too much, so we're okay with that as long as we've got the prevent the enter key from submitting. I don't like that at all. Maybe that's because I'm old-fashioned and I've been doing this a long time, and I like people to do stuff on the keyboard as well as the mouse. So we've got our basic input form there to create a new customer. Now then, obviously we're doing an accounts receivable system, that doesn't do anything. So what we need to do next is to make sure that we can record a transaction. And to make it really simple for ourselves, what we're going to do is to just add a starting balance field here on our add new customer page. So I'm just going to do what we did before, which is copy, which is, you just hold down the control or the command key on the group, and then it will just handily give me a little copy of that. And I will change this to start balance. And this time the placeholder, I'll just put a decimal place in there. Content format in this particular case is going to be a decimal, and decimal places is 2. Show 1000 separator, why not? Okay. Yeah, it can be empty. It's entirely optional as to whether they put in a starting balance or not. Let's just bring it down a little bit. Right, okay, we don't need all that space for a starting balance. Okay, so the idea now is that if they record a starting balance, that we actually want to record a transaction for the customer. So we've not done a lot with the transactions so far, so we'll go back to our data tab and go back to data types and transaction and create a new field. So let's just add that we want to record the actual customer or the business entity. So we will say business entity, and what we can do there is we can say we actually want to record a business entity, and that creates like a foreign key to the business entity table, and this is one of the real powers of Bubble in terms of the way that you can deal with data. It just makes everything so simple because you can embed types within types, and you can even embed lists in fields. So this just makes it a real easy way to create what we call a foreign key in traditional databases back to our business entity table. Now, What we need next is a type, the type of transaction, because it could be an invoice, it could be a credit. For example, with the start balance, what we want to be able to do is if the customer's got a credit balance, they should be able to type in a minus value and it will record a credit transaction. And if it's a positive value, it will record an invoice transaction. So we need a type. Now again, we're going to use option sets here for this. So let's go to option sets and we will create a new option set. Again, I always start option sets with an underscore, just much easier. And we will call this one a transaction type. Okay, and we'll create that. And the new options we will say is invoice, create, credit, create, payment, and finally refund. And those are our transaction type options. So back in data types, let's add a new field. We'll call it type on the transaction, and that is going to be transaction type. Okay, we'll create that. We also will need a date, and we've got a date type we can select. We can do lots of things with dates in Bubble. Cool. So we've got our customer, the date, the type. What we want then is the total, which is a number. We're not going to get into sales tax and things like that with a net and a tax and a total. We're just going to have a total for now. Let's say we have a reference. Okay, and we can go crazy. We can have notes. We can do whatever we want to do on there. But I think that's pretty much it for now. So the customer, the date, a reference that they can type in, the total of the transaction, and the type of the transaction. Okay, we will be adding more, but like I say, we'll explain it as we come to it. So that's okay there. So let's go back to our design. So we've got our start balance field. So when we create, let's go back to our workflow where we create a new business entity. So what we want to do is we want to put a start balance, but behind every action we need the transaction. So we need to record a transaction. So once we created the business entity, what we can do is we will insert, before we reset the inputs, we'll insert an action to create the new transaction. So we'll just right click on there and say insert an action. It's a data things, create a new thing. This time, let's just bring this over here a little bit. This time it's a transaction. And we're going to set the fields. Now we've only really got two pieces of information to put in this. The rest will be hard coded. The first one, well, it's not coded, is it? It will be hard no coded. Have any drool of me? But anyway, so we can say what's the business entity, what's the customer. Now Bubble helps us here a lot, which is fantastic, because we've created a business entity in step 1, so it actually gives us the option to select the results of step 1, which is great. Okay, that just makes it really easy to select that. And then we need the total. We've got that. Now then, I've done a very naughty thing, and I didn't name our starting balance. So you see how that would make it really tricky once you start getting into doing workflows. So again, I'm not the messiah. I'm a very naughty boy for doing that. So let's have a look and let's name this group customer start bal. You do need to start sort of abbreviating things when you get tons of elements on the screen. So customer start bal. Okay, and next customer start bal. Okay, now we can go back to our workflow and we can now say input customer start bal. Okay, the value, right? Now then, in terms of the other things, the type of the transaction, this is something that we're going to need to determine, but for now, let's say that this is this is going to be an invoice. Okay, and again, it's just handy that we've got that we can just select it because of the option sets. The date, Bubble gives us this is something we're going to change, but the bubble gives us a current date and time, so we can just select that for now. And the reference, what we'll do, we'll just put a hard-coded, just a static value in there. Just call it starting balance. Okay. Right, now then, however, we don't want to do this unless they've actually put in a value. So now Bubble allows us to do conditional actions, and that's using this only when. So we can put a condition on there to say only do this when the starting balance is not 0. Okay, so what we can do there is to say only when input customer start value is not, and then we can just put in 0 there. Okay, so only when input customer starts value is not 0, and that way we only create a starting balance transaction if they've put something in as a value. Now at the moment, like I say, what we want to do is to allow them to record a minus value as a credit if the customer's got a credit balance, or a positive value if it's an invoice. But for now we're just going to record it straight as an invoice in there. Just let me make sure we've done everything. We're creating our business entity, we're creating our transaction only if they put a value in. Everything's been done, it looks good. Right, I've got a suspicion I've missed something. Like when you get that feeling that you missed something, but maybe I've already covered it, I don't know. Let's give this a go, otherwise we'll be here all year. So, okay, let's click to refresh. Starting balance, customer name, KBT Enterprises. I really don't know what I'm typing, I'm just making this up as I go along. 61 Mayflower Street, Eddington, EDT, blah blah blah. Dave at KBT Enterprises.co, and let's say his opening balance is 100. Okay, so let's save that. Okay, and let's go and check to see if we've actually recorded that in there. So go to app data. It's obviously created our customer transactions. Right, okay, it looks good. We've got the type, the invoice type, the amount. This is the foreign key, which ends in 4300. It can't be anything but. In this list, by the way, if you look here, you've got this little link that says 3 additional fields. If we click this, we can say that we want to see the unique ID in that list. Okay, and then we can see, yep, ends in 4300. That means that we've got that correct. So it looks like we're working. However, let's look at this. We've got a transaction now for KBT, whatever it was called. But if we look on the business entities, the balance is still 0. Okay, which is no good. We obviously want that balance to be updated when they've recorded that transaction. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a workflow, a custom workflow that's not based on any particular user action, to calculate that balance whenever a transaction is created. So let's go to a workflow tab and click here to create an event, and go down to custom, and we'll say create a custom event. I'm going to call this calculate balance. Type of thing is going to be a business entity. We can assign it into workflow folder, because you can imagine if you've got a fairly complex app, this gets filled up pretty quick, so you can have different folders to organize things, which is what you should do for definite. Okay, so that's done. To calculate the balance. So in here, oh, we haven't actually done anything, sorry, we just create the workflow, sorry. So we click here to add an action. So what we're going to do, again, it's to do with data, because what we're going to do is we're going to make changes to a thing. We're going to update the balance based on a calculation. So we're going to say make changes to a thing. The thing to make changes to is the current workflows business entity, which is why it was really important when we were here that we said what is the type of thing that is being passed in. Okay, because then in here and the action we can just say things to change the current workflows business entity. Okay, and then we just change another field, and this time we're just going to update the balance. Okay, so what do we update the balance with? So what we do is we get Bubble to run a query on the transactions to add everything up. Okay, to add the total up to give us the balance of the customer. Now we're going to change this, but again, I'm going to explain it as I need to explain it. For now, all that we need to do is to say that the balance is going to equal to do a search for. Now, whenever you want to do a search for something on data, whether it's to sum something up or to get a list of data, you do a search for, you select do a search for, which is the equivalent in traditional development terms when you're working with a SQL database is to run a query. Okay, it's exactly the same. Don't think it's anything different than that. So we do a search for. What's the type that we're looking for? We're looking for transactions because we want to sum up the transactions. Okay. Now, what's the constraint? The constraint is that it needs to be the business entity, the customer, that we're running this workflow against. Okay, so this time we say where the transactions business entity is equal to current workflows business entity. Okay, and then here, this has gone red because it doesn't like what we're doing. Okay, we need to search for transactions and we can select more. And what we need to do is to select, we want to total up this, we want to do a sum on the total to get us the balance. So we'll say transactions total, and then we need to say sum. Okay, so we're doing a search for transactions total sum, and in the transactions search for, we've got a constraint on the business entity. Okay, just in case I might need to clarify this, so make changes to a business entity if it's going to do it for me. Come on, Bubble. Right, okay, so make changes to business entity, things to change. Okay, it's going to be the current workflow business entity that we've passed in, that we are going to pass in. Okay, and what we want to change is the balance, and we're going to do a search for transactions for the current business entity, and we're going to sum up the total field to give us that value. So for example, we've got one transaction there for that particular customer, which is 100, so it's going to total add up to give them a balance of 100. Okay, and that's all that we need to do. Now, okay, we've created our custom, now we need to call it. So in here on our save, we need to, once we created the transaction, then we obviously need to go away and calculate the balance. So we'll insert an action, and in here we need to go to, the action needs to be under custom events and trigger a custom event. So what's the workflow thing? Now this is going to be the business entity we created at the start of the workflow, so therefore that's going to be the result of step 1. Okay, now we need to put a condition in here to say only when, because just like we did with the create a new transaction, we're only interested in when we're saving the starting balance, we're only interested in calculating the balance if they've put a starting balance in. So what we can do there is to say input customer start value is not 0. Okay, so let's just look at this. We're creating the customer, we're creating the transaction, and then we're triggering an event by passing in our business entity we've created, the result of step 1, only when they've actually put something in. Okay, so pretty straightforward. So let's just do that again. Now at the moment we can't actually calculate the existing customer, we can do that in a second, and that's why I've put this in a customer separate. I could have put that step in here, but the reason I've not is because I know that's going to get called from other places. So and that's what you need to do. It's a bit like with functions or methods in traditional programming, is anything that you know is going to get called repeatedly, you're going to put it in a separate function. That's just common standard ways of doing it, and it's no different in Bubble. Okay, so let's go back. Now all we've got to do there is to run. And let's quickly create one. EDK tech. I don't know where this stuff just pops into my mind. I have no idea why I do it. Frimington FRT, blah, 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 blah. There's nowhere in the world where postcodes work like that, but I don't care. So email address is, I don't know, info@edktech.com. And let's put that their opening balance is 200 in there. Okay, so we will save that. Okay, we'll go back into our data. Business entities, let's refresh. Okay, has it worked? Yes, we got our balance for 200 on our new customer. We've got to have, where are we, transactions. There's our invoice for 200. And so we now got a way to calculate our balances. So we're starting to work more towards our receivables in there. So we've got it calculating a balance. What I want to do next is to deal with this issue whereby if a customer's got a minus value, a credit value, that it will create it correctly. And there's quite a few things we need to do to get that to work in our app. So the first thing that we need to do with that is to take a look at how we're presently calculating that balance. So in the workflow, when we calculate the balance, what we're doing is we're searching for transactions total sum. Okay, now the transactions total value will always be positive, whether it's a credit or a debit, credit or an invoice or a payment, and that's not always going to work, because if you can imagine, a credit value needs to reduce the balance, an invoice needs to increase the balance, so we can't rely on the total field. So what we do is we create a different value which represents the actual impact, the actual effect on the customer's balance. So to do that, we go to data and data types again, and let's have a look at our transaction. So we'll create a new field and we will just call it value. Now that's the real value of the transaction in terms of how it affects the customer's balance. Okay, now at the moment we obviously aren't recording that, so we need to make sure that we record it, but we'll go back to workflow and we will change what's going on here to scroll down and select value. Okay, so at least that's taken care of. So like I say, with the starting balance, if they type in a minus value, that's got to record a credit transaction. At the moment we're hard coding the invoice side of that. So what we need to do then, in our saving of the customer, we create the transaction. So obviously we can't have this, we can't have the invoice, and also we need to put the value in there as well to record a value on the transaction to affect the balance. Now what we need to do, however, is to store values to make sure that we're not having to run this step where we're creating a new transaction over and over again, because you imagine there's so many different scenarios from what we've just created there. There's actually only two, but there could be more. So rather than do that, in traditional programming we would use variables, and in Bubble we do exactly the same thing, apart from that they're called custom states. Now custom states is something that throws a lot of people off, but actually it's very straightforward, and all custom states are is a way to store a value in memory that you can use later. Now that could be stored on a page and could be across the entire app, or it could be on an element just for while you're carrying out a particular task. It could be for anything. Once you get your head around custom states, virtually anything is possible in Bubble. So let's get going. We're looking at custom states. So what we need to do then is to make sure that on the actual transaction in the total here, because don't forget the total on the transaction has to be a positive value regardless of what type of transaction it is. At the moment we're storing the start balance value, which could be a minus to create a credit, so we can't have that. At the moment we're hard coding the type, which isn't right. So we need to find a way to store these two values that we want to store on the transaction into a custom state, and then rather than directly use the input, use the custom state and the type from a custom state to work that out. So let's show that. If that sounds a bit confusing, let's do that practically. So what we'll do this before we start doing anything at the beginning of this particular workflow. So we'll do insert an action, and we go down to element actions, and we do set state. Now when you're doing development in Bubble, set state is an action that you will use a lot. That's certainly the case when I'm working with Bubble. It's absolutely critical. So the first thing that we can do now, then, what you have to do in Bubble is with custom states you have to put them on an element. Now a lot of people recommend that you put them all at the page level, and I kind of disagree with that a little bit. Certainly if you've got a single page app and you want lots of values that are going to be used globally throughout your page or your app, you would want to store those values, and we'll come to that in a second. I'll show you an example of that. But if you've got something that's being stored on a specific element of the page or specific area of the page or specific task, then tend to limit them to that, because otherwise you end up with this huge list of custom states that becomes a little bit unwieldy. So what we're going to do with in this particular case is we're going to put our custom states to deal with this situation with the starting balance onto this group, okay, and therefore it's just limited to that group. So it's asking us for the element, so it's a group and it's add new customer. There you go. And the custom state, we haven't got any at the moment, so we create a new custom state. Now this is going to be the actual value that we're going to be putting in the total. So we're going to say, we're going to call that the update value, okay. And again, I tend to put states in uppercase and precede them with an underscore so you know what you're dealing with, and that is going to be a number, okay. So now we need to say, okay, what value do you want to assign to this update value? And what we're going to do there is to set if they put in a minus value, what we want to do is to turn that into a positive value so that we can store that on the total, okay? That's something that's important that we do. But obviously we only want to do that if it is a negative value. So we need to put an only when condition on this action step. So let's do that, and we will say that only when the starting balance's value is less than 0. It's a minus value, okay? So in the update value, we want to turn the start balance minus value into a positive value. So the way that we would do that is we would say input customer start bal value, and more we would say times by -1, okay. Now what that little calculation does there is simply, if it's a negative value, it will turn into a positive version of the same value, and vice versa. So in traditional programming, where we want to turn a value from a minus into a positive, we would use a function called absolute or ABS. Out of the box, we don't get that in Bubble, okay. You can install a mass plugin, but we're not getting into plugins in here. We're just doing this with straight Bubble. So that's a calculation that you'd use. So basically what's going to happen is, if the value they type in is a minus value, it's less than 0, then we're going to turn it into a positive value, and we're going to put it into this custom state called update value, okay. And that's only if it's minus, okay. So what happens if it's positive? So we need another workflow step for that. So we'll insert that in here, insert an action. And again, it's under element actions and set state. The element again is group add new customer. The custom state is update value. Now this is only going to get triggered when it's a positive value. So this time we're going to say input customer start bal value is greater than 0. Cool. And this time we're just going to use the straight value from there. And the reason that we're doing this is purely that when we come to do the create the transaction, we can just assign this custom state's value in as the total value of the transaction. Okay, so let's do that now. In create a transaction, we say the total is not going to be that, so I'm going to clear that expression, and I'm going to say that it is the group add new customers update value. Okay, and that's all that we need to do. So let's just clarify this to make sure that we're clear about what we're doing. So the first step that we do is we're saying that if the value they've put in is less than 0, it's a minus value, then calculate that value and turn it into a positive number and stick it into this custom state, this variable if you like, okay. Now then, the next step is only going to get triggered if it's greater than 0. So in other words, whatever they've typed in, only one of these is going to get triggered, not both. So this way is, if they've put in a positive value, then just copy what they've typed in into this value as is, okay. And then when we come to the step of creating the transaction, we just use the the custom states value. Okay, now we need to do something similar for the type, because we don't want the invoice to be statically set as we're doing now. So what we do in this one is we would simply say set another state. The custom state, again, this is on the element we're using to assign this on is the group of the group where they input the customer. So the custom state, we haven't created it yet, so we're going to create this one, and we're going to just say update underscore type, and this one is going to be a transaction type from the option sets. Okay, and we can create that. So this time, again, we're still using this condition, so this time we know it's going to be a credit because they've put in a minus value. So we will say we're going to assign credit into update type, right? Now we need to do the same for this other conditional step, where we'll just say set another state. The custom state is update type, and this time this one is going to be an invoice. Okay, so we're just setting up what we need to store on the transaction before we go ahead and start processing. So when we're on this create a new transaction, where it says type, instead of it being hard coded, okay, we'll clear that expression, and we will say that it's going to be group, add new customers, update type. Okay, so we're using variables, assigning them based on the condition of what we want to check for, and then using those custom states or variables to put into the actual fields. Okay, if you're a coder programmer, this is like bread and butter to you, but if you're not, it might seem a little bit complicated. I hope I've explained it correctly for you. So one of the things that you notice here is that before we selected result of step 1, which was to create a business entity, Bubble quite cleverly has recognised that we've moved up to step 3, and now it's selecting that in there as well. So that's quite good. And let's make sure it's done it with the triggering of the calculate there. Yep, it's got it to result of step 3, which is fantastic. Okay, so what we haven't done so far here is to assign the value, which is on the transaction, which is that new field that we created that we're actually going to use to calculate the balance, because the total is a positive value, always a positive value regardless of the type of transaction. When we're calculating balances, what we need the system to do is to add up invoices, take away credits. Okay, so what we will do with that one is we will select value, and this time what we can do, we can actually rely on the input that they've typed in, because quite handily, if they typed in a negative value, it's a credit. If they typed in a positive value, it's an invoice. So in this case, we can directly take it from the start balances value, whatever they typed in. Okay, and I think we're good to go with that. We've made a good change there so that we can now do credits and invoices depending on the type of entry that they put in. So let's give that a go. Again, I'm going to put in a new customer, and I'm sorry if I'm sort of doing this all over the place. So Helena Fabrics, I don't know, 15 Manson Place, Richmondton, I don't know, RMT, blah 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 blah. Okay, and we'll then say Fiona at helenafabs.com, and this time we are going to put in the minus value, and we're going to say that this is going to be, let's say that they got a minus value of 200 and I don't know, let's a bit more of a random number, 234, and we'll click save. Okay, now let's check if that's done everything we wanted it to do. So let's go to data. Let's take the transaction first in app data. So the transaction, yep, 234, he's definitely raised it as a credit. That's fine. Let's just have a look at what it's put in the value field here. So let's have a look at that. Yep, he's put a minus value, which is great. That's exactly what we wanted. Now that should mean that their balance, because it's added up a minus value, is now minus 234. So let's check that out. Sorry, I've gone to the wrong one. Oh, there we go. Balance minus 234. Great. So that's working. Now let's just do another test quickly, because we want to make sure that it is still doing the invoice side of it right. JJD printing, I don't know, JDB printing, 118 Madison Way, Madison MD, blah, 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 blah. Okay, info at JJD printing solutions.co, and this they owe us 651. Okay, let's save that. Okay, it just take a second, but Bubble's people underestimate how well Bubble optimizes queries and things it needs to do. It's pretty quick actually, and what it does, it uses some AI in the background to learn what you're kind of doing. It's kind of like picked up how over the years how different people are building apps and type of queries they're doing, and it's pretty fast. I know there's not a lot of data on there, so it's difficult to test. Okay, but yeah, there's our new transaction. Yep, they got a positive balance of 651. The transactions, it's recorded it as an invoice, so clearly our workflows are working. So we're pretty cooking on ice at the moment. Sorry, cooking on ice, cooking on gas. Okay, so the next thing we want to do now is we're going to put a table, a list of our customers, so we don't have to keep going back to our data to check that things are getting updated. So the way that we display lists in Bubble is we use what you call a repeating group. Okay, so, but first of all I'm going to put a group on there to contain the repeating group, and I'll name that quickly so I'm not going to get a slap wrist again. So we will say group is customer list. Okay, and we will then drag a repeating group on there. Again, we can tell when we're drawing it within the group because we get like the red box of the group. Good stuff. What we'll do is to make sure that, yeah, okay, we've got plenty of space. So repeating group, customer list. Okay. And we need to tell it the type of content, which is obviously business entities, and the data source. Remember we covered this before, is that you want to do a query for data anywhere in the system, whether it's a list of data or something, you do a search for, and that will query the database. So this time we need to do a search for business entity. There's no constraints, we want everything, so we can sort it by name. We don't want it descending, no. And yeah, we're good to go with that. We can set the different rows. We only actually put content in the very first row of the repeating group, and then everything else just follows suit. So we will just close this up because we need them to be a bit smaller than that. Okay, so it can get a bit tedious doing this, to be honest with you, with the repeating groups, because you've got to get everything right. And especially if we're designing this properly, because you've got to make sure it's responsive and everything like this. We're not going to go down that route in here. We're just going to give you a list that will appear on a standard desktop view, you know. So you start playing with this afterwards and squeezing it down and it doesn't work, you know, that's not my intention here. Like I say, we might do a full video series on turning this app into a full-on proper app, and in which case we'll cover that. But in this one, we want to get the business logic and we want to get the workflows correct. So okay, so let's start putting our data into the list. So we'll put a text in there, and okay, now we can put static data, we can put dynamic. So if you want dynamic, we just click insert dynamic data, and it just tells us current sales business entity. So it's picking up the fact that we set the data source and the data type to be business entity, and we're going to show its name. Okay, and that's what we're going to show. It's not showing because I need it to be a little bit higher. That will do, I think. Yeah, okay. And we will show the address next. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just do Control, or you can do Command on a Mac, and just drag it to copy it. That's fair enough. And we will just change that to the address's name. Now again, I think you should name things on here. The current cells, I don't know. I'm not sure that that's quite correct. Text customer list name. Okay, and there's a bit more space. Is that right? A little bit more. Okay, and okay, customer list address. Control again to just copy that. We might be running out of space a little bit, but anyway. Okay, and this one is going to be the email. And finally we want to put the balance in there, so we probably need to just extend this to the full width of the page. Again, forget responsive in this, this is not what this is about. Okay, oh, I thought I'd done the group to the edge. And just roll that out to the edge. Same with this one. Bit of a pain. It does take some getting used to. And the floating group, push that to the edge as well. And then hopefully we've got a little bit of space at the end there to put another field in. Again, control it to copy it. Let's just make this a lot smaller. Okay, yeah, we probably made these a bit too big, but there you go. Right, okay, so this one should be the balance. We're going to display the balance, and what we need to do with this one is we need to format it. Okay, so the way you'd format it there is you'd select the balance, and then you get a little more thing there, so you click that and you say formatted as, and then we'll just say it's a number, 2 decimal places, there's a decimal separator, yeah, use parentheses with negative numbers, yeah, I like that, do that one. And so on and so forth. What we can do there is to remove the style because we want to show it as right aligned because it's a number. Okay, so that's all you need to do to get it to display your data in the table. So let's just check that out. Okay, so it's scrolling there. We've got a scroll bar. We can change that. Let's go back. On the floating group, we can see where you've got layout style, vertical scrolling. We're going to say extended vertical scrolling, which means it's just going to scroll on and on and on without scroll bars. So for this, it's fine. Okay, there's no problem with this. So, okay, and we need to close things up again. Okay, a bit too big. Now, the reason that it's quite big there is that we need to put headers in there as well. But what we'll do, and again this is really important, just let me make sure I've named everything correctly. No, I haven't. Okay, is we need to make sure that we put all of these in a group, because just to link them all, especially if you're doing responsive, make sure that you do put them in a group. So we'll highlight all of those and we will say right click and group elements in a group. Again, just give yourself a little bit of room for a handle on the group specifically. Okay, and name the group. Group is customer list data. Okay, and then what we can do then is just copy this. Now we can copy the group. So again, using the control key, and then there we go. Just make sure it's lined up as well as you can get it on there. That's it. And then we can put the titles of each one. So I'll just I'll clear the expression, clear all, and then I can just put a static name in there. And I'm going to put these as uppercase, so I'm just going to put name. Just change them a little bit to be bold and whatever. Did I say bold? I thought I'd said bold. There we go. Letter spacing to -1, just make them look a bit different to the data. And again, you see it's just copied the name, so I'm just going to put just going to change those to HDR, just so you know the difference if we need to refer to them. HDR, and again I'm just going to remove the style, stick it into bold, -1 letter spacing. I've obviously got to change this up here, so right click, clear all, and just put address in there. Okay, move this over, do the same thing with this one. Do this one first. Email. Remove the style. Make it bold. Letter spacing -1. And have I changed the name? I didn't change the name. HDR. Did I change it on that one? I did indeed. So I'm going to do header with that one, HDR, clear all, and this is going to be balance, and we're going to bold it, and we're going to, it's already set to right aligned, and we're going to -1 it, just to give that different appearance. Now then, this group, we obviously only want to see at the top. At the moment it's inside every group, so if we were to just take a look at this, we'd see it in every single group, in every single row. We don't want that, so what we would do to make sure that's only showing in the first one is add a conditional. Now conditionals we haven't covered so far. A conditional is, if you like, you're setting up the appearance or the state of an element based upon some event that's gone on. So if you can imagine with workflows, you are creating the event, you are triggering an event and making something happen in the system when that event is triggered. Conditionals come the other way, is that something has happened in the system and you want an element to respond in a certain way based upon the condition of an event, and you can respond based on things like custom states, which again makes custom states very powerful. And it's sort of like data binding. If you're used to programming in something like Vue or whatever, it just gives you that automatic way where it's watching for these conditions and will change the state automatically for you. So what we want to do is to make sure that the conditional is that these are only visible when it's on the first row. Okay, so the first thing we've got to do is make sure it's not visible by default. So the way we do that is this element is visible on page load. No. Conditional. Define a condition. And what we do there, we say when this current cell's index is 1, because each row has an index that you can reference. In this case, we only want it if it's the very first index. And a little bit confusing is that bubble sort of refers to rows as cells. Okay, so when you see a cell, it just means that it's the row. Okay, so that means it's only going to get displayed on that. But what we also want to do is make sure it doesn't maintain the height of it in subsequent rows or subsequent cells. So what we do is there's a checkbox there that says collapse this element's height when hidden. So we tick that and that will collapse it. So let's have a look at this and make sure that it's right. Oh, right, I've missed something. I know I've missed, sorry. where it says I give it the condition, but I didn't tell it what it needed to do. So sorry about that. So we could say this element is visible when the index is 1. Yes. So it's off by default. It's on if the index is 1, the very first cell or record in the list. Okay, sorry about that. That was a schoolboy error. Okay, so there we go. So it's just showing all the data there in the list. Okay, we can see we got the balances for that particular, the customers that we've got, the one that it's calculated it for, which is great. And not the other ones. I don't know if we've got transactions for those, but I know why it's not showing that. So that's great. We've got our list of customers there. We don't need to show the whole of the address, but we're going to be changing this anyway. But we just wanted to show a list of customers and also the balance as well. Now what you notice as well is that this thing has sort of spread itself out across the page, and that's to do with the fact that we haven't set a fixed width. So let's just click on the group and we will go to appearance and we'll say this element is fixed width, and that way it's only going to display it across there, which is just handy for this particular example. There we go. He still centered it, but there you go. We can change that in the responsive settings, but I really don't want to get into that right now. So as long as it displays the data we've put in and the balances, that's the main thing that we want to do. So what we've got here in the data, there are some. We've got values that don't have a value. So let's edit those and stick those in. So this is an invoice that's worth 200, so we need to put that in. Otherwise, based on our calculate balance custom event, it's not going to get triggered, it's not going to get included without that value being set. And the same with this one, it's an invoice for 100, so the value needs to be 100. Okay. Now, at the moment, the only way that the balance is getting calculated is if we record a new transaction for it. So we need a way to recalculate those transactions that are there. And again, we're going to demonstrate now the usability, if you like, of the custom state, the custom event that we created for calculating the balance. So let's have a look at that now. So what we will do is I'm going to just shrink this email a little bit. There we go, and move this across as well. Okay. Now one tip, we're not doing responsive, but one tip on responsive that you need to be really aware of is that when you do headers, to keep them aligned, they've got to be exactly the same left position and exactly the same width. So just be careful, which is why I did what I did. I set these up and then I copied them and then changed them just so that they would be exactly the same. So when you are doing responsive on proper design, make sure that the width is the same and that the X is the same. The left position is the same for the header and the cell that it aligns with. Otherwise, you'll get the different cells going off in all sorts of directions. When you start to kick into responsive settings. So what we want to do here is we're just going to put like a little bit of an icon that you can click to recalculate the balance of each customer, and that will trigger our custom event. So to do that, we go to our icons and we'll just pop that in here. Again, just make sure that when you're doing it in the group that you do get the group. You do get it within the red box. So I'm going to do, let's just go for refresh, that'll do. I only want it 20 by 20, that's fine. And the height, let's set that to, the Y position is 3. Okay, so we've got this here. So now what we want to do is that when they click that, what I want to do is to get it to recalculate for their particular, for the customer that they're clicking it on. So let's start edit a workflow. Okay, we haven't named it, which is why we've got that weird looking name. Again, you go through this and you're just rushing ahead to get stuff done. You forget to name it, and it really causes problems later on if you don't rename them properly. So icon, I'll just put recalc bal. Okay. So back to the workflow. icon recalc bal, click here to add an action, and then all we do is just call the custom event, trigger a custom event, calculate balance, okay, and only when, there's no condition, we want it every time. Now the workflow thing, this is where we need to remember the calculate balance custom event has to have a customer or a business entity. So we click that and we say the parent group's business entity, okay, and that will pass the right one in. Now where is that coming from, parent group? This is really important, okay. The fact of the matter is that this icon that we're calling with the workflow belongs to this, okay. Now this group is within a cell of the floating group, so the cell of the floating group passes through the actual business entity that it represents, or the record it represents, into any groups that's contained in it. So it's already passed it through. So its data source is a current sales business entity. So therefore anything that is within the group doesn't reference the current sales business entity, it references the parent group that it belongs to's business entity or current record, and that way we can reference it through. And that again, just another brilliant aspect of Bubble. It just makes so simple for us. So now we've done that, let's see how that works. Okay, so let's do these two, because let's see if there's any transactions that haven't been recalculated into their balance. Let's try that one. Yep, there we go, 100. Let's try that one. Nope, there's nothing in there for that customer, and probably nothing in it for that one, but it has recalculated the balances for us. Let's recalculate these, because you just never know if there's other transactions in there. No. Okay, great. So that just shows the power really of having custom events that you can just call whenever you want, and that's why I separated that out into that particular workflow. Right, so what I want to do next is, we're sort of moving towards a kind of receivables type of system. You can put a new customer in, you can give it a starting balance, you can calculate the balance, you can see the balance. There's a couple of things. Number one is that we want you to be able to add more transactions, obviously, and different types of transactions. And also what we want to do is to get the aged receivables, the current month, the 30 days, the 60 days, 90 days. And we want to get the system to calculate that and give it you in a list. Okay, and then we also want to be able to see the transactions for each customer, because at the moment they're invisible, they're hidden out of the way of the user, so we don't want that. So that's what we'll do next. Right, so we'll start with building out a facility to be able to enter more transactions. Okay, so let's go back to our editor, into the designer. Now what we'll do that on a pop-up. So a pop-up, if you didn't know, is just something that is like part of the page that acts independently from the page and just pops up in front of you. And Bubble makes it really easy to do that. And it's under containers and in pop-up. So what we'll do is we'll just draw that pop-up on the screen, and immediately it will give us that in front of everything else. Okay, so we'll just give it a name as always, and we'll say pop-up new transaction. Cool. And it wants another type of content that we're going to have, so we're going to make sure it's a transaction. We're not going to give it a data source right now, so we'll just close that. Now one element of Bubble, particularly if you're doing single page apps, is that you're going to have a lot of hidden elements that are going to pop up under or be displayed under certain circumstances, and that's why this element tree here on the left is really important. You see at the moment it's got only show hideable. And what we've got there, we've got the pop-up and we've got the group list, data, which actually is a duplicate name, to be honest. But the reason that that's showing there, because if you remember in here, we made it so it wasn't visible by default. So let's have a look at that. And again, I'm going to change the name of this, because customer list headers, I'm going to call that, is that we set it to this element is visible on page load. It's not. So the minute you set that, it gets put in here, the only show hideable, and that's the reason that's been shown there. So it's like there, if you click the eye, watch it disappear, just leave it on there. The pop-up, if you want to show or display it, you just click the eye and you can sort of toggle that on and off as you want to work with it. So that just makes it really easy to do that. If you untick this, by the way, only show hideable, then you get everything that's in there. And obviously this is where groups are important, because then you can show like a hierarchy of the transactions within the groups. There's a group I haven't named, that fell under the radar. But anyway, so that's just a really handy way of being able to get at the top level elements, and then you can drill in deeper as you need to. So we'll click that. Okay, let's get our pop-up back. And what I'm actually going to do is I will just copy this first of all, bring the pop-up back and just pop it into there, paste. Okay, just so we've got a similar type of element. Let's close it up, we don't need it that wide. Okay, let's add this and we'll just say add new transaction. My typing's terrible today. So, it's because I've got people watching me. So, a new transaction. So obviously then we're going to need to put all the details in about the transaction. So the first thing we're going to do is the type. So what we want is a drop down where you can pick the type of transaction that you want to put in. So we'll do that. Now, just before we do that, I'm sort of skipping ahead of myself here, is we do want a way to close. Always, the first thing you do is add a way to close the pop-up, because otherwise it can be a bit difficult if you get it to pop it up and there's no way to pop it out when the app's running. So what we'll do, we'll add an icon on there in the corner. Okay, and we'll just search for close so that we get a little cross there. We don't need it that big. Let's just have it 26 by 26. Okay, and then what we'll do then, we'll put a little workflow on there. We'll name it first. Add trans close. Okay, we'll have a workflow on there, and all that we need to do with that is element actions is hide. Okay, so we just element actions and the action is hide, and it just tells us what do we want to hide, and it's a pop-up new transaction there. Okay, simple as that. Let's get back to design, and so just move that across a little bit. Now we'll put the drop down in there for our types, our transaction types, for the user to select which type of transaction they're putting in. So input forms, there's a drop down. Okay, just bob that on there. We absolutely don't want it that high. 30 will do, I think. Again, it's going to have its own styling. Not too bad this time actually. The rounding is right. We just need the colour to be consistent. FC, FC, FC. Okay. Choose an option. Not really the placeholder that we want. We will remove the placeholder. Now, what we need to do, what we want it to do in this is to tap into our option set, which is our transaction type option set. So we definitely don't want static choices. We want dynamic choices. And the type of choices that we want is transaction type. Now we need the source. We need to tell it which transaction types that we want. So what we can do there is just say all transaction types basically. Okay, and then we've got the option caption. What do we want it to show? So in this case we just want it to say current options display. So what's that's going to do there is that, remember here in option sets, it's only one attribute on the transaction type, and that is called display, and that's what this is. Okay, so that's what it's referencing there. So if you add other attributes, you could display them for each option set, each option in an option set. Okay, so that's all defined now. Let's put a text on there so that we've got a label by it. Okay, and we'll just say select type. Okay, and move it down a little bit. Let's say new trans type. Again, important to name these drop down trans type. Did I call that one new trans type? I did, didn't I? New. Let's try and be consistent. That's really important with naming. That's the one thing you need to do. Select new trans, I'm getting mixed up now. That's a drop down, new trans type, that's a text, new trans type. Okay, and we've named that, haven't we? No, we have not. Add new transaction title. Okay, good stuff. So as always, what we will do is we will put these in a group, right click, group elements in a group. We will also align vertical centers, so we've got some alignment there. Don't forget as well about the group is just give yourself a little bit of a handle to get hold of it if you need to. Okay, and yeah, that's good. So name the group as well, don't forget, group new trans type. Okay, so we'll just test this to make sure we are getting the options that we need on there. So we need something that's going to pop this up, pop up the pop-up. So what we'll do is we'll move this group down, okay, and extend this group here. And not brilliant UI this, but I mean it gives us what we need for the time being. Okay, and okay, button add new trans, or we'll say button pop up, add new trans. Good stuff. Change the caption to add transaction. Okay, and on the element we then do something similar to what we did before, which is element actions show. Now what you can do as well is there's this thing called animate, which does the same thing, where you can actually show an animation and that will then show it. You just hook it up to an element, tell it what type of animation you want. Not really going into that, you know, we're not trying to turn this into a circus show, it is just to get it up on the screen. So pop-up transaction, easy enough. Okay, and we'll run this and just make sure what we've got is going to work. So we'll click add transaction, up comes our pop-up. Beautiful. What we don't want is the empty option at the top, because we definitely want them to select something on there. So let's just make sure that we get rid of that one on the pop-up. So let's click our little eye. Okay, and let's see what we've got. Placeholder, default value. This input should not be empty yet. It definitely should not be. Should definitely not be empty, and that should be enough to give us our list without the empty option. Add transaction. Beautiful. Good stuff. Okay, so next thing we want to do then is to ask them for the customer that the transaction has been recorded for. Now, because we're going to be, now we could do a drop down on this one, and we could hook it up to do a search for on the data source, do a search for in the same way as we've got the choices source, we've got all transaction types in the option set. But we're going to use something different. We're going to use what we call a search box. Now, there are plugins that are way better than this, but I'm just purely showing you what Bubble has got to offer out of the box here. So we'll go and get a search box on there. Again, we'll keep it a consistent height, and we will remove the style. Okay, 16, that's fine. Okay, roundness, no, we want 3. Okay, and the other thing as well, what it's got is this awful horizontal padding thing where it gives you like this huge gap between the edge and the text. So I'm going to set that to 4, which is the same as what I've got the others. I think. Let me make absolutely sure that that's what it's set to here. Okay. Not sure. But anyway, on here, and again, you know, the colour's different as well. So that's just let's try and make it a little bit consistent. Notice the drop down box as well. We had to change that, so let's. Okay, we don't need to copy it. I know what the colour is. So background style is FC. Okay. Now the conditionals are going to do something odd, so I'm just going to get rid of the bits where it's going to set any horizontal padding that I don't like. Okay. Conditionals are just like when it's focused, when it's hovered. You can do all of that type of thing as well. I'm going to name it as well, so it's going to be what did we say? Was it Neutrons customer? The reason that we're sort of putting these long elongated names on there is because they're all on the page. So even though it's a pop-up, it's not isolated from the page. So you know, we do need to sort of really be fairly verbose about how we're going to select that. So let's copy select type and move that copy here. Let's align vertical centers. Let's group elements in a group. Let's change that to text Neutrons customer, and obviously we need to change the caption to customer. Okay, and let's just name the group Neutrons customer, and I don't like the placeholder to start typing. Let's just say find customer. Okay, now in here this is the search box, so we've got choices style. We want dynamic choices, so you say define a list of options. Okay, do a search for. Now this is what it's doing for us, it's automating do a search. The type is going to be a business entity. And the only constraint that we can put in there really is that the type is equal to customer. Okay, there's no other type, but I mean we can put that constraint. Sort by, certainly we can sort by the name, not descending, and that's what we're doing there. The field to search is going to be the name. The default value, no default values. Prevent enter on submitting. Yet this input should not be empty, absolutely shouldn't be empty, because we need a customer to record the transaction. And I think that's it with that one. Yeah, okay, I'll tell you what, one thing, did I click that with allow prevent? Does it give you the option? No, it doesn't give you the option with that one. Okay, so let's just again, let's test this to make sure that's running. Let's make it the same size. So how the search box works basically is that I didn't give myself a handle on the group, did I? Okay, that's it. So how the search box works is that if when you type in more than 2 characters, it then does a search for what you've typed in, and will give you any matching entries in a drop down. So let's just try that out. Add transaction, and as we search, let's go HEL. There we go, and then you can then just select it, and then the actual record will then be assigned into that, so we can then reference it at the end when we're saving the transaction. Okay, so pretty straightforward really. Okay, so let's have a look at the next one, which is going to be date. So what we will do is we will we then go back to our standard inputs. We have a date time picker. I suppose we can use that if we want. Let's try that one. Let's set that to 30 and we'll name it new trans date. Okay, initial content we will set to current date and time. Let's just move that up a little bit, and we will just copy the, again, Control or Command and drag down. Okay, and we will set that to date, new trans date. Okay, let's vertically align vertical centers and group elements in a group. Give the group a little bit of a handle and name the group new trans date. Okay, that's named, good stuff. Okay, so the input type is date. We don't want the time. We don't need that. Display drop downs to pick month and year. Yeah, we can say that. It shouldn't be empty. It's visible. Okay. Let's remove the style on there and make sure we've got our standard style. No, we don't. FC. Okay. Roundness, we definitely don't want it at 6. We want it at 3. Okay, just make it a little bit similar if we can. Right, okay, the date format, this is important now. So it gives you all of these things here. So I'm in the UK, so we display it as day, MMYY. So what I can do there is on the custom, I can set a custom format. So I can do DD MM YYYY. Okay, and then that's just going to do it in the UK format. I apologise to my American friends, it's the wrong format, but there you go. So let's set then let's make sure we're not doing anything silly on here, which we are. Okay, so there you go. So let's have a look at how that works with Bubble with the date time picker that we've got. Add a transaction, it's an invoice, JJ, there we go. Select that one. We can then pick any transaction that we like, any date that we want, whatever it is. It's all good stuff. It's pretty nice stuff, since we're not really having to do a lot to get that kind of functionality into our app. Okay, so the next thing is we need to know the amount, and we also need to give them a reference. So for the first time, we're going to be looking at just a standard input. Okay, and placeholder. Not a massive fan of placeholders, to be honest. So we will copy and paste this here. Okay, we will call it reference. Okay, and again, let's get consistent with our naming. New trans reference, input new trans reference. Good stuff. Let's align vertical centers and group elements in a group. Give the group, you can, no, wrong one. You can see what's going on. That's a group. See when you don't give it a handle, so give it a handle all the time, and then name the group that it's in. Group new trans reference. Okay, and let's make sure we're consistent. Yeah. No, the roundness shouldn't be that. It should be 3. Okay, make sure we're not going to do something silly with the horizontal padding. I hate that. Okay. We need to just move that over slightly. Okay, a bit too much, is it? Right, okay. Okay, so what we can do as well is select all of these now, and what we can do is right click and select align to the left so they're all aligned, and make them the same size preferably. Okay, roughly right. So we've got the type, customer, date, reference. I think there's just the total now. Just let me make sure there's no other fields that we've added where we can put lots in. So customer, date, the reference, total, type. Yep, the value is not something that we put in manually. Okay, so just one more. So we'll copy this whole thing this time. Okay, and make sure, did I name everything? I did. Sorry, I'm being a bit anal retentive about that. It's just standard practice. So, okay, total. Okay, total. Okay, total. And the group is total. Okay, with the input, the content format is going to be a decimal, and we're going to have 2 decimal places. Show 1000 separators, prevent it from missing. It shouldn't be empty. No, it should not be empty. And the range as well, we can set a range, because this time, unlike the opening balance, we're going to select the type, so they can specifically select that it's a credit, so therefore we don't want them putting anything that's minus. So let's just set that the minimum value is going to be 0, no maximum value. Yep, all good. I thought I was pretty good at setting these so they're 30. Okay. That's the thing with Bubble. Once you get into it, you just become like this obsessive over getting everything lined up, and I'm not even really going to town here by any means. Okay, so let's just close this up and close this up, and we just need a save button now that's on there. So what we'll do, rather than start dragging and setting things, we'll just copy this one, and okay, all good stuff. Right, now then, let's just make sure it's not copied the workflow as well. No, it hasn't actually, so we'll just bin that. Design. Okay, we'll say customer save. We need to change this to new trans save. Okay, so what we want to do now is to save this transaction, and it's going to be very similar to the other one. We're not going to create a customer beforehand. It's just purely saving the transaction, and then we're going to close the pop-up once they've put it in. Okay, so start edit the workflow. So click here to add a new action. So it's going to be a data things. We're going to create a new thing, which is going to be a transaction, and we're going to set the fields up here. So the first thing is going to be the type, and that is going to be right. Okay, Bubbles just had a little bit of a wobbler on me, so just let me make sure that everything's okay. It's trying to save and it can't. Okay, have I lost connection? No, it doesn't seem to be. Okay, give it a chance. Okay, so we're going to create a new transaction. We're going to say that the type is going to be, and it's a drop down, isn't it? So the drop down new trans types value. Now if you look at the value there, if you hover over it, it'll tell you it evaluates to an underscore transaction type, which is exactly what the type is. It's a transaction type, which is the option set, and that's what we want. So the next one obviously is the business entity, and that's going to be equal to, so this one is going to be a search box. So there's search box new trans customer, and that's the value. So if we look there, the search box new trans customer's value evaluates to a business entity, so that's good. So we're going to set a new field. I'm a little bit worried that it's still saving, to be honest, so but we'll carry on. So we will do the date, and again we will go to, this will be the date time picker, new trans date, value, okay, and that obviously evaluates to a date. So the next one is the reference, okay, so that is going to be import new trans reference as value, and finally is the total of the transaction. So total is import new trans total as value. Okay, so the last thing that we need to store on the transaction is the value field, and if you remember, that's the field that stores the value that affects the balance. It's how the balance is going to get calculated. So we need to do something a bit different with this. If you remember last time when we were saving the customer and we set these action steps up, and we did this thing where we were converting a negative value into a positive. Okay, so we need to do that, a similar sort of thing here, but it needs to be the opposite way round. So if you can imagine that if it's a credit transaction, or a transaction that's going to reduce the balance, we're going to need to get the total value, or what they've put in as the total value, into a minus value in order to store that, and then obviously store the plus value in there as well. So let's do that, and again we'll do the same thing over here by, we'll just close this and we'll right click on this and say insert an action, and again we're going to set state. So under element actions we'll set state, and the element this time we'll set it on the pop-up. So we'll say it's going to be on the pop-up new transaction. Custom state, we don't have one. So what we'll do, we'll call this one update value, and we can give it the same name as the other one because that we used previously, because it's on a different element, and that's going to be a number in there as well. So what we want to do with that is to take the amount that they've typed in, which is stored in import new trans total value, and what we want to do with that is click more, and we want to say times by -1, and that's just a calculation that turns a negative value into a positive, or vice versa, and it's the vice versa that we want here. So we know that the trans total is going to be a positive value. It has to be. We've set it so they can't put a negative value in, and by times it by -1, that will turn it into its equivalent minus value. Okay, but obviously we only want to do that if it's a credit type of transaction. Now we could simply put here in the only when condition, we could simply put where the drop down of the new trans types value is credit. However, if you look in that list, we've also got payment there as well. So we've got a credit and a payment. Now what we could do if we wanted to is to, you know, start to say, or, you know, is it a credit or is it a payment? What I would rather do with that, it'll be a little bit more sophisticated, shall we say, and what we're going to do, we're going to use the option sets. So in our data, as I mentioned before, you can add new attributes for each option set. So at the moment we just got the display, which, sorry, that's the wrong one, transaction type I wanted. So for each one of these is actually stored in the display attribute. So what we can do is to create a new attribute, and what we're going to do, we're going to call this attribute increase, and this is going to indicate if this transaction increases the balance or decreases it. So what we can do there is to say that this is going to be yes or no, which is, in programming, that's a Boolean value that we usually use as true or false, but in Bubble they prefer to, I'm sorry about the noise, I think the bin men or the garbage men are outside, I apologise for that. But anyway, yeah, Bubble likes to avoid technical terms, so they just have it as a yes or no value, so we'll create that in there. And then we can say modify attribute. So against the invoice we will say that the increase is yes, that's increasing the balance. For a credit, modify attributes, no, that's not going to increase the balance. The same for the payment. And the refund will increase the balance, because if you're refunding money back that's been paid, then that means that you're increasing the balance back again. So that is an increase. Okay, so that's another little thing that you can do on option sets, is use the attributes. And now we can use that on our conditional back in our workflow. So in our action step, we're going to do this, and we can say only when is to say drop down new trans types values increase is no. So in other words, when the type that they've selected's increase attribute is no, which means it's not going to increase the balance. Then we're going to turn a positive value, which is the total that we've typed in, into a negative that we're ultimately going to store in the value field. So just like we did last time, we're also going to need to put a step in there to store the value into this custom state. So again, we will do insert an action, and again it's an element action, set state. It's on the pop-up, and it's update value, and we're going to set the conditional here. So this time it's going to be the drop downs type values increase is yes. Okay, and the value is we're just going to grab it straight from the input of the total, because like I say, it's already positive, so we know that. So just a quick recap. If the transaction type that they select, if its increase attribute is no, which means it's a decrease in the balance, then we take the total that they've typed in and we turn that into a negative value to put in the value field, to make sure that that gets deducted from the balance when we're doing the balance calculation. And with this one, is the transaction type they've selected's increase attribute, is it yes? In that case, just grab the value and put it in there. And so when we in our create the transaction action step, we can then just do select another field, and we will go to value, and we will select the pop-up new transactions input value. Cool. And that should work for us now. So the one last action step I want to do is to clear the inputs and then close it. We can't just close it, so we can't just hide it. It's not really closing it. We can't just hide it without clearing the inputs, because the inputs will still left behind. So another couple of action steps: element actions, reset inputs, and finally the last one will be element actions and hide, and the pop-up, that will be the pop-up new transaction. Okay, so we've got a 5-step workflow there for when they click the transaction. Sets the state of the value custom state that we're going to record as the value on the transaction, creates the value, reset the inputs, and then hide the pop-up. Okay, and we'll give that a whirl. We'll put it in for this customer here, or maybe this customer KBT, so that we'll be able to see their balance change as we do this. Oh no, I've missed a key step in the workflow. Right, we've got to recalculate the balance after this. So we're going to insert the action. I had a feeling I'd missed something. So what we do there is, again, custom events, trigger a custom event, and calculate balance. It's the only custom event we've got set up at the moment, so that's why it keeps defaulting it. And the workflow thing, what we're going to need to do is to say that this is going to be the search box new trans customer that they've selected, and we can see that that evaluates to a business entity, so it's quite happy. If it wasn't right, if it was evaluating to something different, this would show in red and we get a little issue box at the top. Okay, now we're ready to try this. So let's refresh the page, and KBD Enterprises, just so that we know we're going to see it underneath the pop-up. So add transaction, cool. We'll say it's an invoice, and it's going to be KBT Enterprises. The date, let's set that for like, let's say the 2nd of September. Okay, we'll just make something up in there, and we'll say that that is 193. Okay, and if we just, we'll run that now. There we go. It's automatically recalculated it. Now, this is one thing we should point out here. Again, another brilliant thing about Bubble is that out of the box, Bubble's repeating list, in fact, any data that you display on the screen that's linked to a particular data value is live. It is real time. Now, if you're a software developer and you've been in the game for a while, you'll know that that is a pain in the arse to do. You've got to hook up to certain type of back-end databases like Firebase. You've got to do a lot of work to make that happen. In Bubble, it's just there. It's just out of the box, which is fantastic. So what we'll do, we'll add another transaction, and this time it will be, let's do a payment this time to make sure it works, and we will do that on let's say JJD. So we'll do JJD printing. There we go. We'll set that for, I don't know, let's say put another good day, the 9th, and we will do, I'll tell you what, we'll set it back even further than that. We'll do this like the 24th of August. It's not an invoice, it's a pay, blah blah blah, and let's say 250. What's his balance? JJ, yeah, okay, 250. So his balance should change to 401 if this is done correctly. We've done it as a payment, so let's save that. Beautiful, 401. So everything's working there. Everything that we've done, just let's make sure it must be recording the transactions, otherwise the balance wouldn't get calculated. But let's just check on here, all transactions. Yeah, we're getting our transactions in there, and we can see that our value is being recorded correctly. So that's great. We've now got transactions in there, selecting different transaction types, updating our balance, and it's all good. So the next thing I want to do now is to start to get into the age receivables, so that in this list, rather than showing, let's just go there, instead of showing like the address and the email and whatever, what we'll do is show the balance and the current period, the 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and so on, so that you can see how an aged receivables app will work in Bubble, again, all without code. So that's the next thing that we will do. Okay, so what we'll do is play around with this a little bit. I noticed that our headers are not visible, so to elements tree and just click the eye so that they're visible, so at least we get some idea. So what we'll do is we will delete the address and we will delete the email, and we will pop these two over here. We won't let us drag them together because they're in two different groups. So again, just make sure when you're dragging these things that you keep the red box visible, otherwise you're going to drop them out of the group. Okay, let's make sure, yeah, okay, that's fine. So let's drag these again in, make sure they're aligned. Okay, that's fine. Right, so we're going to display the balance in the first group, the overall balance, and then we're going to do the current balance next. So we will do the control or command and just drag that over. Okay, so let's click this. Now in here, because we've copied it, we've got the balance field. Now in the age balances, we're not going to be displaying the value in a field because we're not going to store them, we're going to calculate them. And the reason being is that our balance is quite a static value, it's an overall balance, so you know, that only moves when a transaction is recorded, but your 30, 60 day, 90 day, they can move depending on the date into and drop into a previous period or whatever. So we need to calculate those live, and we can do it the way we're going to do it, or there's other ways to do it, but this is certainly the easiest way to do it. To do it the other way, or one of the other ways, would be fairly complex, and this to me is as good as any way of doing it. So we will clear the expression in there, we will call that, and we will just rename that to current bal. Or I'll tell you what, current period. Okay, we'll set the value for that in a second. Let's just give it the header. Line that up, that's fine. And this is current. I don't know if it will let us put all that in. Yes, it will. Good stuff. Right, okay. And we'll make another copy of this. Okay, and of this. Okay, and with this one we will say 30 days. Right, now before we start doing 60, 90 and so on and so forth, let's get an idea of what we're going to do here. So what we need to do is to pull in a calculation on the transactions to give us the transaction total, or the balance, the total of the balance of the transactions for the first 30 days. Okay, so if you like, from today's date to 30 days, or 29 days at least. Okay, so the way that we do that is, let's just click insert dynamic data. And what we want to do, again, we're going to run a query on the transactions. So as always in Bubble, you do a search for. Okay, now a lot of programmers at this point are going to be sort of cringing, thinking, wow, this is going to be massively unoptimized, this is going to be really slow. Like I say, do not underestimate Bubble's ability to optimize queries and what it does. It doesn't do things in a sequential order, it actually does them in batches. So you'll be amazed at how fast it actually comes up with this stuff. So just have a little bit of trust in Bubble. You know, in Bubble we trust, and all of that type of thing. So do a search for transactions. Okay, and the constraint is obviously it needs to be for that particular business entity. And again, we will get that from the parent group's business entity. Again, because the actual floating group is based on a list of business entities, so it knows which one we're doing. So again, we can do what we did before and simply say that we're going to get the value and more, and then we're going to sum that up. Okay, so similar to what we did with the when we were calculating, not when we displayed the balance, but when we were calculating the balance, similar principle. However, we need to add a constraint to make sure that only the transactions that are in the current period, okay, in the last 30 days or last 29 days, actually appear in this calculation to total up into this column. So we're going to add another constraint, and this time we're going to say the date. Okay, so because it's the date, we have to say that the date has to be greater than. So what we need to say is that we need to pick up the current date and time, and then minus 29 days from that date, current date and time. Okay, and to make sure that the date is greater than that. Okay, so what we can do is to say that, and again we'll replace this current date and time with something different, and I'll show you that shortly. But anyway, current date and time, and then we click more. So Bubble gives us some really nice date calculation functions. So what we're going to do with this one is we're going to say plus days, and we're going to put in there minus 30. Okay, so if it's greater than, so if you imagine today is the 6th of October 2021, that's when I'm recording this. So 30 days before that, 30 days before that would have been, there's 30 days in September, so it's the 6th of September. And the date has to be greater than that. So only transactions that are recorded from the 7th of September onwards to today's date are going to get included in this particular column, which is pretty much all of the transactions I think we've put in so far. So let's just recap on that just to make sure that you're clear on this. Okay, so what we've done is we've said we're going to put in a dynamic value, we're going to search for transactions, which will run a query on the transactions, we're going to sum the value from those transactions, and the constraint that we're going to query for is just for the current sales customer, and the date that's on the transaction, if for each transaction, has to be the current date minus 30 days. Okay, so that's how we're going to calculate that period there. So what we'll do is we'll leave this for now. This is going to be a bit more involved, So obviously that's going to be displayed without really showing anything, so ignore that one. What we're looking for is this column here. So let's just make sure that that all works. Okay, there we go. Sorry, we haven't set the formatting on there, so let's just change that. The sum, if we select the sum again, and we can say more, we can say formatted as, and that's 2,000 separator. Yep, show me parentheses for negative values, and that's that, and then we can run that again. Okay, so we can see, if you remember when I was putting those transactions in, I set dates back, and I did that for a reason, to make sure that we can get something that doesn't exactly look like that. So what we've got there is a different value in balance. These are the same, obviously. So that means that there's other transactions happening before, older than the current period, so in 30 days or maybe 60 days as well. So that is just calculating the current period. Right, so we're really moving towards our age receivable balances here. So the next thing we need to do is this one here. So it's a similar process. Let's go for insert dynamic data, and we're going to do a search for, again, transactions. Let's go back in here before we specify the constraints. So we'll go more, select the value field, and we're going to sum. If I can scroll, where is it? There we go. And then we'll do formatted as display negative values. Okay, so that's set up now, so we can go back to our constraints. Again, we're going to say that the business entity has to be equal to the parent group's business entity. Now we need to add two constraints on here. The first one is a similar way that we did that one, because if you can imagine, we can guarantee that everything from that point is included, okay, even if it's in a future date. But with this one, what we need to do is to make sure it's only 30 days up to 60 days, okay. So the first thing that we need to do then, add the constraint, and we can say that the date has to be greater than, and we can say again current date and time plus days minus 60. So this time we only want to include, we want to limit it to transactions that are not older, if you like, than ultimately 59 days. But now we need to make sure that they're also not earlier, if you like, than 30 days. So we add a new constraint, and we can say the date. Now this time we say less than or equal to, because it could be 30 days. So again, we're going to say the current date and time, okay, plus days, and this time we'll say minus 30. So let's just check what we've done there. Is we're saying that if we take the current date and time, we minus 60 from it, which off the top of my head should be like the 7th of August, I think. So it has to be greater than the 7th of August, and it has to be less than or equal to 30 days ago, which is the 6th of September. Okay, so it's just showing you it's just going to total the transactions that are in, that are 30 days old but no older than 59 days effectively. Okay, to make sure they drop into this column. Okay, we've formatted it, everything's ready to go, so let's give that a go. We should see a couple of figures drop in here. There we go. Okay, so we've got that's the payment that we put in for 250, and we've got a invoice for 193. Those are the transactions that I put in before. What we'll do next, after we've done all of these columns, is we will give you a list of transactions that you can select to see where that balance has come from. Okay, so at the moment that's great, we're doing well, so let's just crack on and do the rest of the columns now that we've got the principles right. Okay, so we will control. I hope that I'm explaining this well enough and that you're sort of getting how powerful this is. So I'm amazed I could do it. When I first started playing with this and realised what I could do this without code, I was just blown away, absolutely blown away. And I wished, and that's the reason I'm making these videos, I really wished that I would have had a video like this, where somebody building some fairly complex stuff in Bubble to create a real live usable business app, which this isn't, it's a prototype, but the functionality is perfectly usable in a real world business app. Someone would have showed me that, I would have been in on it straight away. Instead, I sort of wasted 2 years just on the fringes of playing around with it. Anyway, I digress. So 60 days, again, we've got everything set up, so we'll just change the constraints. This time this is going to be, just change that to minus 90 days, and this one is minus 60 days. Okay, and the next one will be, we're going to get rid of this because we don't really need this calculate balance anymore, to be honest, because, and actually I don't know why this group never pushed its way to the left hand side when we were doing it before. So let's try and do it again now, eh? Let's do right, okay, the group did, it was just the floating group that didn't. Okay. Okay, so let's just move everything across, give us a bit more space. Okay, that'll do. And again, I've got to get these aligned because it doesn't matter so much here, but generally speaking, it's sort of critical you get these aligned as you move them, because you don't want we're looking for the blue thing to pop. Is that not going to pop? Okay. Right, okay, I've made a schoolboy error here, and I'm going to undo a couple of steps. I should have moved the groups instead of the individual controls. So I apologise for that. So let's have a look. Okay, now when we move the group, that should pop. There we go. Move that up slightly. There we go. Okay, so let's copy these. Let's extend this outwards. Okay, 60 days, it's going to be 90 days. Okay. Notice I've not been naming these, by the way, so, but I don't think we're going to need to reference them, so I'm not going to waste your time and mine. Keep naming things that I'm not actually going to reference. It's still bad practice, but come on, we're already over 2 hours here, so we need to crack on. So, okay, the constraints on this one. Okay, so this time it's got to be 120 days, and that one's going to be 90 days. Okay. Right, and then we just got one more column to do, which we might not have the room to do it, so okay. So what we'll do is we'll just close the name up a little bit if we can. Okay, yeah. No. Oh, okay. Right. I don't think that they are. Okay, what's the X252? Okay, 254, so they've got to go over 2 more. And we can do that by holding down control and just nudging it to the left 2. And then that should do it. And they should be aligned in there. Looks good. Okay, it's not too important for this one, but it's just sort of standard practice that we need to get the headers and the data labels aligned. So let's follow that one across. Okay. Okay, and this is going to be a 120 days plus. Okay, so anything older than 120 days is going to get included in there, and we'll need to extend the group to the end. Okay, and then we're going to push that across. Okay, and so I've clicked on the group. Have I dropped that out of the group? Right, there's a great example of what I've done there. I've dropped the label out of the group. Okay, so I need to sort of find a way to drag it back in, and the only way really to do it is just to close the group, drag the label out, and this is exactly why I say to you, do make sure that you keep it in the group, because it can be a pain otherwise. So, oh, I've gone. Oh, there we go. It's going to let me do it. Thank goodness for that. Okay, yep, so it's in the group. That's in the group now, hopefully. Okay, you can tell it's in the group because you'll see it sort of reflected in these other cells when you're. Okay, we just need to drop that down. The Y value needs to be 2. Okay. Right, so this is the last thing we need to do with the constraints. We don't need this first constraint. Okay, we just need it to be less than 120. So the date has to be less than 100, less than or equal to 120. So in other words, the date is less than the current date time minus 120 days. In other words, anything earlier, any transactions that are earlier than 120 days will not be included in the, will drop into the 120 days column. Right, okay, I think we're done with that. So let's update our page. There won't be any values in that because we haven't got any transactions any older than the 30-day column. Okay, so what we'll do, we can put a transaction in, and let's what we'll do there is, I'll tell you what, a couple of these haven't got any transactions. So let's put an invoice, and it's TR components. Now let's say we want something to drop into 60 days, so that will be, let's say, the 2nd of August or something like that. 2nd of August. And let's say 492. Save that. Okay, and that's dropped nicely into the 60-day column. Okay, let's add another transaction for, again, an invoice for Peacock Fabrications. Let's do this another month before that, all the way back to July, on the, let's say the 5th of July. I'll tell you what, for our American friends, let's say the 4th of July. Okay, I know how much you love that, especially when talking to an English guy. So, okay, so let's just say that's 378, and this will drop into 90 days for Peacock. There we go. See how fast that's done that, because it's real time. It's actually a lot quicker than you'd expect, and this thing speeds up, bizarrely enough, not the more data you put in it, but the more processes that you run through it. Bubble learns and optimizes it as much as it can, and continues to optimize it as best that it can. Okay, so we'll just go and put a transaction in like way back to make sure it drops in there. So let's say we're going to do it for one of these top two, let's say Helena Fabrics, and let's go all the way back. They're very remiss in paying, all the way back to April. Let's say April the 20th, and and 225. Okay, and that should drop into the, there we go, 120 days there. So everything seems to be working fantastic in that regard. So we've got now our aged receivables going on, which is great. So just go back. If you're a bit confused about how I've done the operations with the dates, just replay that as many times as you need to replay it, just to go through exactly what we've done. But it's looking really, really good. Now, the last thing I want to do in this prototype, because you know time's getting on, and I appreciate you giving me a lot of your time. I hope you've learned a lot. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we want to just display another repeating group just to show the transactions. And what we're going to do is that when you click on each customer, it will show you the transactions for that customer, so that you can see what's going on and what is behind these aged receivable balances. And we'll do that next. Right, so let's go back to our editor, and we're going to be putting a group and a repeating group. Let's close this up. Okay, and we'll put a group, and we will line it with the page so that we've got it's all the way across. And we will then put a repeating group in there, just as we did before. Again, just making sure that we're in the actual group itself. We use the full, right, okay, just keeping the red box there. Cool. Now I'm going to try and speed through this a little bit. I'm not going to be naming things, I'm not going to be aligning things perfectly. I really appreciate your time so far, but we are a long way into this, so let's just try and rush through it a little bit. The type of content on the repeating group is obviously transactions in this case. The data source, okay, we'll sort that out in a second, but let's just get this right first. It's going to be a extended vertical scrolling, so it'll keep scrolling. In fact, we won't even put headers with this because, like I say, it's unnecessary. It's just to demonstrate how this works. So let's put our text on there, and what we'll do, this will be the type of the transaction. So insert dynamic data, current sales transactions type. Okay, display. And actually we'll just go to the top because we're not going to be putting headers on there. Let's just, obviously you can, if you're following along, you can put your headers in there whenever you like. Let's just close this right up so that we've got there. Okay, so make it big enough, because if it doesn't display, it usually means it's not high enough. There you go. Right, so let's just control and or command and tab to get that out there. Next one is the date. We know what the customer is going to be because we're going to select it in this list up here. So this time it's going to be transactions date. Okay. Again, what we'll do, we'll format that. So we'll format as format type. Let's have it. So we'll do a custom. And we'll do DD space MMM, which will give you a short month, and year, and it tells you over here how it's going to display it. Okay, close that. Okay, let's control and drag, or command and drag, and this one is going to be the drag that over a little bit. This is going to be the reference, so we'll just say it's the reference. And finally we will put in the one for the total, so we'll just drag this one. Okay, this one is going to be the total, and we're going to format this to be 2 decimal places, 1,000 separators, negative numbers. There should be no negative numbers, but we'll put that in there. And we'll also remove the style so that we're displaying it right aligned. Okay, and that's as good as we won't go into this. We're trying to get this done at the moment. Okay, so we're not, like I say, we're not specified the data source. So what we need to do, is be aware that the list of transactions really should be based on the selected customer that we're going to select. So what we'll do in here is we will, on the data source there, is again do a search for transactions, and the constraint is going to be where the transactions business entity is equal to, what are we going to equal it to? Okay, so what the plan is to do is to actually store, when they click in this repeating group up here, when they click a customer, that we set a custom state for that customer. And what we will do, we will store that on the page. So the best way to do that is if we go to here, or we can store it on this particular repeating group. So we'll select that and we'll go to the I, and we will say add a new custom state, and we will say that it's called underscore selected BE, okay, business entity, and that will be of type business entity. Okay, so we'll select that, and that's on this group customer list. So in here, in our data source, search for transactions, business entity is equal to group customer list and selected business entity. Okay, so therefore we have to select an entity in here before we get any transactions in here, and what we can do here is we'll sort it by the date, the transactions, and we'll do it in descending order actually, so that we get the newest ones at the top of the list. Ignore empty constraints. This is useful if it's empty. If there's nothing in the list, which there won't be at the beginning, this will be empty. And let's say we want to show everything until you select a customer. Okay, so do we want to do that? No, I'll leave that. We just want to select it when you pick a customer. Let's do that way. I'll tell you what, we can. It's no odds. At least you can see everything then, even before you've selected a customer. So ignore empty constraints means if there's nothing selected here in this particular constraint, in other words, what we're trying to assign is empty, then it will ignore it and just show you everything. Okay, so that means that when we first load the page, this will be empty, and we'll make sure that that it just shows everything, because we're going to ignore the constraint. So let's just here, what we want to do here now is just to add a little sort of icon that they can click to see that particular customer's transactions. So let's just see, can we close things up a little bit to give us some space? We probably can. We don't need a lot. Maybe just reduce this a little bit. Okay, what's the width of that now? Now I've butchered it. The width is 224. And what's that there? What's the X is 38. Let's set that to 38. Okay, and what's the X of that? 277. And that one 416, 16, and that one 569, that one 697, that one 827, and that one 945. Is it? Okay, I think that's shorter than that actually. What's the width of that? 118. Let's set that to 118. Oh, it is 118. Oh, okay, so right, we need it to be a little bit shorter, don't we? So that's 118 and 954, 118 954. Right, okay. Sorry about that. I really didn't want to get into that during this, but there you go. So let's put an icon on here, on this, into this group. So let's put an icon, and we'll just draw that right in the corner. Okay, let's just say it's a magnifying glass. Hello. Magnify. Oh, I don't know. What do you call it? I thought we call it a magnifying glass, spyglass or something. No. Look up. No. I don't know. We'll have to find it manually, won't we? Wow. I'm sure you could just type in magnifying glass and find it. There we go. Okay, that'll do for now. Okay. So, therefore, when we click it, we can start and edit a workflow. And all that we've got to do there, I haven't even named it, don't worry. I'm trying to get through it. So what we can do there is to set an element action, set the state of our group customer list and our selected BE, and we are going to set it to the parent group's business entity. Okay, so therefore that will get selected, and because in here we'd automatically set the constraint to be equal to that, then this should then change each time that we do it. So let's give that a go and see if that all works out for us. I don't think we've missed anything. Okay, so this again, so this is giving us everything. That's every transaction we've got sorted in date order with the earliest first. That's great. If I select TR components, just one invoice, Peacock. Okay. No headers, so but it's fairly straightforward. Okay, so we can just select each one. Okay, great stuff. So at least that gives us there. Let's just set the group that it belongs to a fixed width, so that we get the similar sort of thing to what we're getting above. Let's make sure that's right. Oh, he's moved it over there. Fair enough. I'm not going to play. It's because we've not gone to the end selecting things, so the responsiveness has got us this. We're not going to play around too much with it. The point is that we can now see the transaction. So we can see that Helena's got a -9 balance, and in the current period it's got a 234. So that's a credit for 234. In 120 days they've got 225 from April. And let's take a look at this one. There's a one with a few on there. No, I think we only got 2 for each one, haven't we? Or 1. Okay, so we can see there that on the 2nd of September we got 198 or 193, which is in the 30 days. And so we can see that we can now see the transactions in there. Like I say, display wise it's not ideal, I appreciate that, but you can get the principle of what we're trying to do. So let's just go through what we did in terms of getting that. Whenever you clicked on this one, we basically set a workflow that sets the state of the underscore selected underscore BE business entity, and that the floating group for the transactions is relying on that particular workflow. So whenever it's changed in here, this reflects in here. Again, all part of Bubble's real-time data update, so we get a lot out of the box without having to do a lot, which is fantastic. And then because we said ignore empty constraints, because that's empty at the beginning, then we get every transaction at the beginning with that. Okay, we're almost done. I really appreciate your time sticking with me so far. I hope you've learned a lot. There's some fairly sophisticated features that I've shown you in Bubble to create this type of application, and obviously the sky's the limit really once you get going with it. One of the things I wanted to show you, which I think is important, is to do with dates, because with the current date, when we record a transaction on the current date, or we're using the current date in these in the constraints here, the current date also maintains a time. Okay, and because we're storing the transactions on a particular time, so when we look at the pop-up on the save workflow, you can see when we create the transaction, the date is always well, actually no, actually there where they can select the date obviously, but the default that we're using is the current date time. Okay, the problem with that is that when you come to start doing date arithmetic, which includes what we're doing here with these things, where are we? There we go. When we're looking at data arithmetic here, where we're doing plus and minus, and we can do greater than and less than and whatever, the trouble is it's going to take the time into account. So therefore you could be in a situation where actually it should be appearing or shouldn't be appearing, but is or isn't because of the time that's set. So what I tend to do is to set a system-wide time at the beginning on the page as a custom state, and then use that one rather than the system date. And the way that I do this is in the workflow, we'll create click here to create an event, and under general we've got a workflow event called page is loaded. So this gets triggered when the actual page, and if it's a single page app, that's when the app's loaded, and so we can set initial values if we need to on there. So what we will do here is we will set an action and element actions to set a state, and the element is the page itself, which in this case is called index. It could be called whatever you want it to be called. The custom state, we don't have one yet, and so I will put again, like to proceed it with an underscore today date. Okay, and that is going to be a date. We're going to create that, and the value, the initial value, is going to be the current date and time as provided by Bubble. However, I'm going to click the more, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to set these up. So I'm going to set them all to 0. So I'm going to set hours to 0. Okay, I'm going to do more, and I'm going to set the minutes to 0, and I'm going to set the seconds to 0. So what that will do then is that if I use that as the default date throughout the system, every date that's recorded will just get 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. So therefore there's no sort of situation where a date can have a different time which then works out to be greater than or less than and fall out, you know, just cause a couple of problems with your date ranges within that. So once that's set, so all I'm doing now is just saying, yep, set me to the date time, but the time that it gives me, set it to hours to 0, minutes to 0, seconds to 0, and that way, hang on, just let me check something now. I don't think I've set that right. I've put plus minutes, sorry, I need to change minutes too, okay? And the same with seconds, that will add so many seconds to it. What I want to do is to actually just set it to 0. So let me check that. Change hours to 0, change minutes to 0, change seconds to 0. So the only thing that's involved in this today's date is the actual date, and the time is not a factor anymore in that. Okay, so then we're then going to need to change it in a few places, obviously. The first one I think is when you save a new customer, because when we do a transaction here, we're just defaulting to the current date. So we'll clear that expression, and we will say index today's date. That's there. Okay. I think in our pop-up, let's show our pop-up, where scroll to the top. In our pop-up, yeah, I think we're using the today's date as the initial content. Yeah, so let's just clear that, and let's go and say index is today's date. Okay, and that's good enough. And obviously we need to change it in here where we're relying on the date to give us our balances. So let's just go and change this. So what we will do is there just select index. Index is today's date. Now it's unfortunately it's gone and lost us the rest of our expression, so which is a little bit of a pain, but at the end of the day I should have shown you this before I did this, to be honest. It's my fault. Okay, so we're going to say plus days, and that was minus 30. in there. Okay. And I think I'll do it in one more, but I think that you get the picture. Is that rather than relying on Bubbles' current date and time, you basically make sure that you create your own at the beginning, eliminate the time element of that date if it's appropriate. You know, I mean, it might be appropriate for you to keep that. So that's minus 60 minus 30. So index today's date plus days minus 60, and rather than Bubbles' current date time length, you'll then use your own custom state throughout. So index today's date plus days minus 30, and so on and so forth. You change the rest of these as well. Okay. So I think that's about it. I think we'll wrap it up there. I really appreciate your time sticking with me this long. It's been quite a long one. But then again, we've built an entire, if you like, prototype. The back end, the workflows are all there, and some of the front end elements as well. It's for an accounts receivable app built in a couple of hours, 2.5 hours. So, and obviously I've done a lot of stopping to explain things, so you can do this a lot quicker once you get going with it. But the purpose of this video was to show you that you can build sophisticated, complex business apps, financial apps in Bubble. There really is no limitation to what you can do, and you can see I've not written a line of code in anywhere in that. And the good thing about Bubble is that there is no brick walls. So even if you do come up with something where Bubble just can't handle it, number one, you go and look at a plugin to see if there's one available that somebody else has developed, and often there is. And secondly, if not, you can develop your own plugin or build your own API that you can call into. So one of the things that I like about Bubble that you don't get with any other no-code tool, I mean, there's lots of other things that are claiming to be no-code tools, and some of them are app builders. None of them come close to the sophistication that you've got with Bubble. Really, seriously, they don't. And I've looked at a few, they just don't come close. So anyway, Bubble's my weapon of choice. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Don't forget to like and subscribe and click the old bell so that you'll get notified when I put more videos up. And hopefully I'll be doing lots more content in the future, maybe breaking them down into smaller chunks in future so we don't get such a long video. But listen, I really appreciate your time, and I hope to see you again very, very soon. Take it easy.